G'day folks, it's Rob here and welcome to our little backyard farm. In today's clip I'm going to show you how we like to grow our ginger. So you'll probably be more familiar with it in this form here. Now ginger is an absolutely awesome plant to grow. It's a member of a much larger family, and you also have plants like turmeric, galangal and cardamom in the same family. Now ginger really does love a nice warm tropical climate to grow in. It prefers growing seasons above 25 degrees Celsius or 77 Fahrenheit, but with a few, tips and tricks, you may be able to grow some of this in a cooler region. I'll run through some of those tips and tricks as we go through the video. Now, as for the best zones to grow it in, typically warm temperate to tropical, or if you're in the States, I think that equates to around about 9 till 12. So ginger is grown from the root section. It's the same section of the root that you would add to your stir fry once you mince it up a bit, or add into soups, or maybe even make some ginger beer from. We've used store-bought rhizome, and we've also used rhizome we've bought from plant suppliers. Now, there are some people who have told me that in different places around the world, they will spray the root with a sprouting inhibitor in the supermarket, basically to prolong its shelf life. It won't send up shoots and it will last longer for them. Now, if you are concerned that may be an issue in your area, it may pay for you to buy a piece from an organic grocer's and try and start off your crop with that. Now, when you are looking for ginger sections to buy, what you want is a piece like this, probably around about 3 to 4 inches or 7.5 to 10 centimeters in length. And it's a good idea to get a section with a couple of little buds on it already. These little buds are what will send up the green shoots. The more green shoots at the get-go, the more energy the rhizome will have, and hopefully you'll end up with a larger crop. I have seen people break off little sections from a larger piece like this and plant that out. I really don't think it's a good idea though, because the more little sprouting points you have on the ginger, the better your crop is going to be. If you do end up buying a nice large section of ginger, and there's a couple of different growth points all around it, what you can do is snap it in half and then plant 2 separate sections out. One thing I would do though is let it dry over a day or two, basically let the wound heal over. The reason for that being is I've planted some that I've freshly broken as I planted it previously, and I have found that I've lost 1 or 2. Whether a bit of an infection's got in the open cut, I'm not too sure. But yeah, I do think it's best to just let it heal over before you plant them out. One thing to look out for is stores that sell dehydrated, wrinkly sections of ginger like this. Now, if it's mildly wrinkled, you can probably get away with just popping it in a bowl of water for 6 to 12 hours to let it rehydrate a bit. But something like this is definitely too far gone. You may be able to use it in cooking, but I definitely wouldn't use it to plan out my next crop of ginger. Now, as for planting these guys out, the best time to plant them out if you're in a climate like ours, subtropical or a warm temperate, is towards the end of winter. Have them in the ground, so once it starts to warm up in spring, they'll start to send up their shoots. Just be careful if you do have frosts in your area. They can kill off the shoots once they appear, so it might be a good idea to either protect them or maybe wait until the last frost is finished before you do plant them out. In cooler regions or in warmer regions, if you want a bit of a jump start on this season, what you can do is plant them in little containers inside, and then once the soil's warmed up and any chance of frost has passed, you can then plant them out. That way you can get to extend your growing season a little bit, and yeah, hopefully you'll end up with a decent harvest towards the end. One thing I would point out is if you are going to grow them in containers in a cool climate, I would pop them into the container you want to grow them in. In a cool climate, I think you could probably get away with 1 rhizome, 1 little piece of ginger in a 30 centimetre or 1 foot wide pot. And if you want to grow a larger crop, you could probably use a 60 centimetre or 2 foot wide diameter pot, and you could pop 3 to 4 rhizomes, again only in a cooler climate, and that should give you a fair amount of rhizome to harvest towards the end of the year. Now, if you're in a warmer climate like us, I'd probably skip the 30 centimetre or 1 foot pot and go straight for the 60 centimetre one, and I would only plant 2 bits of rhizome in there at the most. I've got a root pouch out down the back, and I went down and checked it out earlier, and it is almost half full with rhizome growing around the edge of the pouch. I've also found 2 little flower spikes in there, which is very encouraging. So in a warmer climate, I'd probably only stick to 2 rhizomes in a 60-centimetre pot. Now when it comes to planting ginger out into the soil, they really do like a nice, well-draining, compost-rich blend. Planting out the ginger rhizome is very straightforward. I dig a little trench about 2 inches or 5 centimetres deep, and then place the ginger on its side so the little green buds are pointing upwards. Cover it back in with soil, and Bob's your uncle. If your soil isn't too free draining, it might be a good idea to create little mounds in rows through the garden and plant your ginger in those little mounds, and that'll just allow it to drain away any excess moisture. Basically, ginger likes a little bit of air around its roots, so if it's too moist, you will end up with a few issues trying to grow your ginger. As for spacing, I pretty much will stick to around about a 20 to 30 centimetre or an 8 to 12 inch spacing between my plants, and I find that gives them enough room to move. Sometimes they will grow into each other and can be a bit of a jigsaw puzzle to get them apart, but you know, that's all part of the fun of harvesting, I suppose. Now, the best blend I've found to grow these guys in container is a 3-part very good quality potting mix to 1 part homegrown top-notch compost, or purchased compost if you can't make it yourself. With ours, I like to put through a small handful of a slow-release chicken-based fertiliser, as well as a small handful of kelp meal. That just helps to provide a few extra nutrients during the growing season, as nutrients do tend to be washed out of containers when you water them. And I plant the rhizomes in at the same depth as I would the soil, 2 inches or 5 centimetres. Over the top of the soil beds, as well as the containers, I like to add mulch, and that just stops the surface from drying out, retaining the moisture in there for the ginger. Ginger can also be grown in aquaponics as well as hydroponics. We've had some very good harvests from our aquaponic ginger here. It is best grown in a flood and drain bed. That way you have the water coming up and then receding, allowing air to get around the roots of the ginger itself. Now, you plant it out the same as you do any other ginger, pretty much just 2 inches or 50 mil below the surface of the clay or whatever media you're using. Now, as to where to locate your ginger plot in the yard, I like to put ours in filtered sunlight here in the subtropics, mainly because I have grown it in almost full sun previously and the plants didn't do too well. I have found plants like this one next to me do extremely well under the shade cloth here, and also in a little sheltered position behind the lime tree. We've had good harvests from both locations. If you're in a cool climate here in the southern hemisphere, it's a good idea to set up your ginger plot or the containers you're growing them in a position that faces north. The reason for that is the early spring sun and the late summer sun will be coming at you from the north, so it just helps to keep the plot a little bit warmer that little bit longer. If you're in the northern hemisphere, you do the reverse. You situate your plot or the containers in a position that faces south for the same reason, because your sun will be coming in from the south. So that way you basically get to extend your growing season just a little bit extra. So don't be too concerned if you don't see the shoots from your ginger emerge for a couple of weeks. Even here in the subtropics, it's taken anywhere up to about 6 weeks for the first shoots to appear. Don't despair, just be patient. They will come when they're ready. As for maintenance through the season, pretty much we'll just need to keep the plants moist and stop the soil from drying out. And also, I like to give mine a bit of a feed with compost halfway through the growing season, as I do with all my Zingabaceae plants like the turmeric and the galangal. You can also give them a bit of a liquid feed if you want, as I mentioned before. Every month and a half to 2 months I will do it here, mainly because my soil mix is fairly rich and I know they're pretty happy in there. But if you're just using standard potting mix, maybe every 3 to 4 weeks you might want to give them a little bit of a top up. So when it comes to harvesting ginger, you can pretty much harvest it as soon as you start to see little rhizomes appear as you dig around or fossick around the root of the plant. Now, I prefer to let it stay and become more mature and a lot more plump, but I do know some people that like to harvest that baby or young ginger. I just find the more mature rhizome has a more pungent flavour and aroma to it, and that's what I prefer. So it generally takes around about 8 months to get a decent set of rhizomes in warm climates. Sometimes in the cooler regions, you might want to just let them die back in the pot or in the garden, if you don't have a hard freeze, just let them overwinter and then let them sprout again the following spring and have a 2-year growing season. That'll just let the rhizomes bulk up a bit and you'll get a nice harvest. For us here though, we pretty much will harvest on a yearly basis. 8 to 10 months is our growing season, especially if we have a mild autumn, and then we can take the rhizome out. What I have done in the past is leave a little bit of rhizome behind just so we get a head start on the next growing season. Now, when it comes to lifting the root itself, it's pretty straightforward. In the aquaponics, I just pretty much all moved the clay away, got my fingers underneath, lifted it out and gave a bit of a hose off. In the soil, I just get a garden fork, put it down beside the rhizome, lift it gently, and then just hose off any soil that comes out with the root itself. So it is a fairly basic root to harvest. When it comes to storing the ginger, I'm actually working on a clip on that at the moment, and I'll post it in a couple of weeks' time. But basically the methods I've used in the past is pureeing the root with a little bit of water and then freezing it, and then you can just bring out small little chunks whenever you want to add it to stir fries or teas or whatever through the year. Another method we've used is dehydrating it and creating little ginger chips, which we then just grind down when needed to add the ginger powder to recipes, but I will post a more in-depth look at that in the following weeks. So as you can see, growing ginger in a warm climate like ours is fairly easy to do, and I hope that the tips I've given through the clip have encouraged you folks in cooler areas to have a crack at growing some of your own. At the end of the clip, I'm going to include a couple of thumbnails, one to a playlist on growing ginger, turmeric and other bits and pieces, also runs through a few harvests, and another clip that shows you how we planted out 4 different types of ginger in the season just past. I do hope this clip has helped you folks out and you may have picked up a tip or two, and I will catch you next clip. Cheers all, have a great one.